Hi, I'm Shanil Kaderali. I'm the Executive Vice President of Pierpoint Global. We are a niche-based recruitment process outsourcing firm, RPO firm, focused on technology and technology companies. Our clients include Microsoft, HP, Varian Medical Systems, Juniper, Symantec, and many others. Today, I'm not here to talk about Pierpoint. I'm here to talk about RPO or not. Most of my career, I've spent it in corporate talent acquisition. I started off as an AIRS trainer. I was one of the first few. Traveled all over the U.S., training recruiters on how to effectively source. And I got hired by Cisco Systems to build an internal sourcing function and did so globally, building the largest sourcing function, I believe, probably in corporate America, hiring 19,000 people in 1 year. Afterwards, I worked for a baker's dozen RPO firm overseeing operations and sourcing and programs, and then moved into healthcare. I just recently joined Pierpoint, and one of the things I want to say is that, over my career, if I was asked, should you do an RPO or not, I'd always say it depends. And even though today I work for an RPO, my answer is the same. I'm agnostic. It really depends on the business case. And today we're going to talk about RPO or not, the business case. RPO is not for everyone. It's not going to work for every organization. But one of the things for this presentation is to walk you through what the advantages are, what the disadvantages are, when it works. Sometimes in cases RPO is shown not to work, and I'll talk a little bit about that. In addition, it is all hinging on an effectively well-documented and articulate business case. And I'm going to walk you through what a business case will look like to help you determine if you should go RPO or not. So let's start talking about impacting your business with effective recruitment and really asking the central question of which is better, an RPO or an internal model. And when we look at it, we really look at what the impact is. And starting off, we look at what efficient recruiting is. And efficient recruiting is everything from reducing your time to fill and reducing cost. And we go from efficient to effective, so better candidate quality, improving the hiring manager experience, and enhancing the selection process. And these are all areas that we focus on and many of us strive to get to. And to do so with the ultimate aim of really having the greatest business impact in areas of new hire productivity, of employee engagement, of driving revenue and profitability. Hiring the best people is going to achieve those outcomes. The question then becomes, should you use an RPO model or an internal model? Now, one of the things I want to stress is that it doesn't have to be either or, but we are going to look at the business case and compare the two models so it can help you make what the best decision for you is. Now, let's look at the landscape of the RPO world. It originally started off basically from a staffing and a search function. Very, very simple basic, and it has really evolved to that whole A to Z process, looking at sourcing and screening, going all the way to interviewing to onboarding. And it is supported by various data systems in terms of applicant tracking systems, candidate data management systems, and all of these are affected with critical service levels. So they're bundled and you determine what the important service level metrics are for all areas of the process. And that is a tremendous advantage. So it has evolved significantly. It's become far more sophisticated and complex comparatively to how it was in the past. When we look at the different players in the space, you have pure play RPO like The Right Thing and Pinstripe. We would add an organization which is more niche-based like Pierpoint, which focuses far greater on technology organizations. But you have legacy temp staffing firms which have moved into the whole RPO world, the Kellys, the Manpowers. Then you've got some of the Asian players moving to North American space like Talent2, and from Europe, Alexander Mann. Some of the specialty search firms, FutureStep and Hudson, have gotten into the RPO world, as well as some of the large HRO providers. IBM, of course, was doing it as a standalone and then recently purchased Connexa. Aon Hewitt is another big HRO provider with an RPO practice. A company outside of the talent acquisition space, ADP, bought up The Right Thing. So it's a very, very dynamic market. It's globalizing. and we're seeing this landscape change significantly. Now, I think we all understand when we talk about an in-house model what that is, and that is, of course, hiring internal recruiters, sourcers, coordinators to help with hiring, and these are badged employees. One of the things that I've done in this presentation is use an example from one of our clients. So I'll reference this and the types of positions and use that as a comparative to help you understand the main points. But when we talk about an internal model, we're talking about staffing it up, how long it would take, the technology you need, applicant tracking systems, CRMs. One of the challenges, we're hiring 12,000 teachers. And it was a pretty onerous undertaking when you're looking at that kind of volume, high turnover. And you really want to look at doing the right thing and using the right model. Are you going to hire groups of recruiters to help staff up to hire that volume, or are you going to outsource that as well? Now, when you look at the internal model, you typically have a better understanding of the culture, theoretically, and you also, in addition, should have more control. And those are some of the features when you look at the entire, some of the parts of having an internal hiring approach. When you look at the model to use, you look at different approaches, a distributed recruiting model, an RPO piece. There is one thing I mentioned, and there's no secret, you can do both. They're not mutually exclusive. Blended models can work significantly well. There are some, in essence, best practices that you'll see with both. There are also, in addition, examples where some have worked better than others. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about a couple of examples of case studies. Let's look at some RPO examples. Walmart, they reduced their less than 90-day turnover from 54 to 30%. And they were talking about almost 4,000 hires using an RPO firm. Pepsi, within 12 months, reduced from 28% to 6% its turnover as well. Chubb Insurance reduced their agency costs by 70% by using an RPO. Now let's look at a couple of in-house models. Macy is an example of high volume recruiting using an internal staff. Cisco, during its boom years, hired like 19,000 professionals in 1 year. That was an internal model. So when you start looking at some of the differences, there are some trends, some patterns you see. RPO is typically good with high volume, replicable positions, which demonstrate themselves in industries like banking and finance and retail, call center worlds. In-house models are typically used with much more complex positions where culture is a much more important role within the organization. Now, let's talk about comparing the models for your needs. Let's look at some of the benefits. When you look at in-house and RPO, both have that opportunity to enhance your quality of hire. But one of the things when you look at an in-house model is you are controlling the recruitment process with employees, and you can potentially lower the cost over the long run because you are bringing everything in-house with you. Now, with an RPO approach, it's much more scalable. It should be much more cost effective. And if you can bundle in technology, you are at a much better place with regarding leveraging technology investments. Now, some of the challenges with both models include, for in-house, it does take longer to scale. It may require much more upfront capital investment. It may require a greater investment in technology and process. And you have to ask yourself, can you really scale with that model? With regards to the RPO model, you really have to understand how loyal the RPO provider is going to be in the context of who their other clients are. Are they willing to put fees at risk if they don't hit their service levels? They have to put some skin in the game. And they have to have a good methodology of how they're going to learn your culture. If they have fees at risk, trust me, they're incentivized to learn your culture far more quickly. Now, what do? Now you're at the stage, you've compared some of the models, RPO is good with replicable and high volume. In-house is used for complex positions where culture plays an important role. And we're still talking volume here. So where do we start? What do we do? First thing is to define your business problem. Look at the models for your specific needs. And then look at the total cost of the problem. And when you look at the total cost of the problem, you have to develop a business case. You have to compare apples to apples. I typically do a 3 to 5 year analysis, but everyone is a little different. You have to look at the other areas of your recruiting function, like recruitment advertising, job board expenses. You have to look at all of those factors and incorporate it into your analysis. You should probably do an RFP, visit the different firms, and make sure that you have the right change management in place and the right approach and buy-in from your stakeholders as well as your HR and finance organizations. And then you got to decide and just do it, whichever you're going to do. So when we talk about this, the first case is, what is your business challenge? Is it turnover? Is it quality of hire? And in the example we're using teachers, right? So 12,200 teachers left this organization. And we had to define that problem. And so the problem is, really high turnover and really high, less than 90-day turnover. The next thing that we do is we look at a total cost approach and what is the overall cost of the problem. So we make a determination of what our turnover cost per hire is and make the calculation of what is that turnover cost. And apply it, in this case, 12,000. We figured it was a $900 cost to turnover. But that's not the only thing. We're talking about an education company that are hiring teachers. They're unhappy parents. 20% of parent issues involve teacher turnover. There's negative impact from social media and the word of mouth. You're looking at other things like longer time to fill positions, accreditation challenges, labor issues. And when you actually factor in, our estimates show that this organization was losing between $2 to $18 million a year in revenues, productivity losses, and a tremendous negative brand impact, which is very difficult to quantify, but is very significant and was significant to this particular organization. Now, the business case itself is, providing a common point of measurement to compare the service provider to the in-scope activities, doing apples to apples, and you're just using a primary yardstick to compare the two. Now, when you look at RPO versus an internal model, you have to look at what is going to be the quickest, what is cost effective, and what is going to be the most qualitative in terms of the slate of candidates that are being presented. That is critical all the time. Let's look at a basic format of a business case here. I took the baseline of the organization, which is, what we're doing today. Like, what is it costing us to deliver this particular number of hires the way we're doing it today, and looking at labor and service costs and then non-labor costs. So we look at the baseline model, and then we compare it to the in-house and the RPO. And you see in this particular example, for hiring 12,000 people, from a labor perspective, it's almost $6 million. Non-labor is 1.6, and it comes to a cost per hire of approximately $633. When you look at an in-house model, there's a lot of assumptions, and I'm going to talk about some of these particular assumptions. You look at the cost there being almost $3.6 million, non-labor being $2.2 million, and a $484 cost per hire. An RPO model is a higher labor cost because it's the service cost that you're delivering, but you are having reductions in areas of technology, job board postings, advertising, background checks, because you're hiring less, supposedly, because you're hiring better quality people. And that comes out to a $426 cost per hire. So in this case, cost per hire is showing RPO as a better approach, at least from that, but that's not the only way you look at it. The next slide gets into a little bit more detail where we're looking at the current model versus the RPO and what the variances are. So we've talked about the delivery cost, and there's a cost per hire for the 12,000, and there's the calculation there on the slide, 4.2 million. But we're looking at recruitment technology and the transition costs. With the RPO, there is technology costs to help with the applicant tracking system. Then I look at hiring costs that you're going to have either way. You have to hire 12,000 people. There's time, there are employment administration costs, background check costs, and that's going to stay as it is. Then we're looking at sourcing and advertising. And when you move to an RPO and they cover a component of the posting cost, then you should see a reduction. And you can make that calculation. In this case, it was about 40%. Interview time is a soft cost. It's not a hard cost. Now, finance is only going to be interested in your hard cost, so that's why you have to show the variances. But it's still a very real cost. In this example, hiring managers were doing all the interviewing. If you move to an RPO model, you're taking away that burden from them. And as such, you will see a significant reduction in the time that they're applying. And as such, you will see those costs be reduced, and it's reflected here in this example. The other main important thing is that if you have an RPO and you've negotiated fees at risk for them to hit the critical levels, here's the example of saying, RPO, your service level agreement is to reduce turnover by 5%. If you're able to reduce it from 48 to 43%, you're hitting the objectives. Now, if they actually reduce the turnover, that means that you are hiring, or you're saving hires, in the sense that you're not hiring as many had you been at the 48% turnover. And in this case, it was about 600 hires, give or take. And knowing what the turnover cost is, you take those number of hires, multiply it by your turnover cost, and you have a turnover reduction benefit, and you need to incorporate that in your business case. This is pretty important, but you have to negotiate fees at risk when you're talking about this kind of volume. Here's an example of it broken out in a 5-year model, looking at the baseline supplier prices, what those normalizations are in relation to advertise. Cost or retain go live is typically a reference to what it takes when you transition to the new model. And then, of course, any governance costs, as well as the turnover benefit impact, and just scaling that over 5 years. And in this case, the business numbers look like, from a cost perspective, that the RPO is a good decision. Now, one of the things I want to be very clear about is that cost is not the only factor in determining if you want to use an RPO approach or not. Scalability is an example. This slide talks about scalability. What are those incremental resources you need deployed to hit peak hiring volumes? And that's an important factor to look at as well. Now we're going to look at the big picture, cost, quality, and company impact. Again, as I noted, cost is a factor, but it's not the only factor. And we're here, and this is an example of talking about hiring teachers. So for candidates, we're talking about a better candidate experience. Generally, right now, with this past client, it was definitely a very inconsistent approach. And when you're looking at every candidate that you interview, they have a negative experience, they're going to tell 3 to 5 people. And that word of mouth really affects the brand. So a consistent process is essential. For recruiters, they understand the service level, they understand what they need to do, who they need to do it with, and when they need to have it done. For the enterprise, I think that's the big thing. For every 1% reduction in turnover, we were looking at a potential close to $228,000 cost reduction. And if you hit the service level agreement of reducing turnover, in this particular case, 5%, if it was 10%, you would see significant retention in revenue that would have been lost by parents leaving, and in this case, almost 18 million. And then when you look at the RPO approach for the enterprise, because of bundling in technology, reducing costs on the advertising side, you're looking at a potential 1.5 million savings than the current approach being done today. For hiring leaders, you're talking about a seamless recruiting process, which is really important. You're talking about folks that they're trying to hire being in the job sooner, which impacts revenue. So when you look at all those factors for hiring leaders and the enterprise and candidates and the recruiters, you see some significant advantages. So you have to weigh the pros and the cons. And in this particular case, you have $3 to $4 million annual incremental costs and some major change management. So it's not something small to do. When you're looking at an RPO at this volume, it's big. But you're also looking at anywhere between minimum $2 million potential revenue gain from that. You're hiring better, and you'd be between 1.5 and 1.8 million in savings to your current approach. And you have value to your customers. So in this case, it's efficient, scalable, and it offers support for your hiring managers in a cost-effective manner. So in this case, the RPO would weigh favorably. There are cases where you have to be a little bit more cautious about using an RPO approach. If you have multiple complex niche-based positions where I've hired statisticians and I've hired very complex systems and solutions architects that need specific types of coding experience and in cloud environments. To hire those folks using an RPO model that doesn't understand that world, it may not work out for you. I think positions that are very culturally focused and require a lot of sensitive political savvy, they tend to be one-offs, but I wouldn't use an RPO for those. I'd be very careful with director and above. I think you can build that as an internal function or use sourcing and sourcers and researchers for your senior level roles. I would never outsource everything, and I work for an outsource company. So I'm being very candid when I say that. There are great opportunities in where you can outsource. A company like Pierpoint, we focus on technology positions, but we do it in volume, and we have high-level senior technical recruiters that we either place on-site or virtually that have been living in that industry, breathing it for a long time. And so our approach is different. Not every RPO is monolithic. Each has their own personality. And you have to find, if you're going to go with an RPO, you have to choose an organization that best suits your culture and what you're looking for. High volume, high replicable positions focused on cost. There are some great firms that do that. Complex technology roles that can be done globally. A company like ours is a good consideration. Another consideration for the future is the whole area of total talent management and the systems that you use within that. Here's an interesting slide. It's about increasing business flexibility. There was a very unique study by IBM with Fortune 200 chief HR officers on what are their organizations going to look like with labor flexibility. And it's really interesting. 56% said they were going to increase outsourcing. 50-something% said they were going to increase offshoring and hire more part-time workers and temporary workers and bring back retired workers. So the other question to ask is, what is better suited an RPO and internal model, given that this labor model or the labor composition, workforce composition that you're hiring is going to change? That's something that you have to look at as an organization as well. Or as we've discussed, scalability, cost, flexibility with the hiring in terms of volume are all factors. Types of roles within the organization, what your costs are today, what they're going to be, what your technology investments need to be and bundled in, ensuring that there are fees at risk. So if you're working with a provider, that they're incentivized to learn your culture, or hiring more internally. It varies. In Silicon Valley, it's a mix. One of the things that a company like Pierpoint does is when contract recruiters time out, we absorb them as our employees and offer an army of sourcers to support their efforts. That works well in Silicon Valley. Some of the high volume RPO with replicable positions may not work as well in those situations. But when you're looking at hiring, thousands of nurses, thousands of positions in retail or finance, RPO models can work well. And again, they have to have technology embedded, service level, fees at risk for the service level attainment that's being directed. And no matter what you choose, it's obviously a big decision. There's always a lot of information out there. I hope this presentation has helped you. Visit our website, www.pierpoint.com. Look at our news site, and if there's information or content or questions or any more learnings that you'd like to ask of us, please feel free and ask of me personally. Wish you the best. If you choose RPO, it's a good thing, and if you don't, then that's a good thing too, depending on what your needs are. So I hope you've learned something today, and thank you.